In a way, the work of the nuns was an image of the entire mission, a mission that was happening both in what we did with our hands and our hearts, but what was also happening within our souls. We arrived at the mission in different places, but the Lord had already been working within our hearts, and something was there to build on. In the same way, we arrived at the nuns' house, and their rooms were set. A makeshift chapel was upstairs, and yet they didn't have a place to cook food. They had a little corrugated iron or tin roof by the wall, built on just 4 poles, wooden poles, and every time the dust would come with the wind, it would just rip into their kitchen and leave all the food coated in a dust that would make their food unable to eat, unable to be sold as well. These nuns had built their house with 14,000 bricks, each of them made by their own hands. They'd taken 5.5 buckets of sand they'd bought, along with 1 bag of cement and 4.5 little powder to color the bricks red. Then they'd beaten those down and then laid the bricks out. Bricks would dry in about 3 hours, and then repeat the whole process over and over again. When we arrived, the place where the kitchen was to be was covered with other bricks, the bricks they were going to use for that. In the same way, we arrived in Nicaragua with all these tasks or ideas going on, and everything we needed to begin building was sitting there, but almost in the way. So our first work when arriving to the nun's kitchen was moving the bricks aside from where they were placed and placing them in the new spot so then they could be worked on. The bricks were in the wrong places. In the same way, we had a lot of things in our hearts that were good things, but perhaps in the wrong place, and the Lord needed to begin his work. Once we'd cleared out the bricks, once our hearts were a little more empty, the next step was to burn away all of the stubble and the weeds and cut them back so that then we could have something totally empty to begin digging into. In the same way in our hearts over this mission, we needed to kind of burn out that idea of the comforts or perhaps first world things, all the distractions that can get in the way. And then once our hearts were empty, once we'd been more detached from everything that was going on, the next step, hardest perhaps, was to dig. This was the hardest part for the construction efforts because that ground wasn't just dirt from a garden or a field. It was somewhere where a steamroller had pressed down. Sometimes we find that in our digging within our hearts and souls over the mission, things were tough. Sometimes our ground was hard. We had hardened hearts, like some of the readings of those days. And yet we had to dig and create a hole, create a need, reveal a problem. And that's what the Lord wants sometimes. He reveals a hole in our hearts, a need we have. And only if we let him dig that hole can he begin to build. Part of the digging that he did within our hearts, at least within my heart, was kind of like for perhaps the first hole, if you're talking in the 4 corners, in the prison, and seeing that all of my pains are small, and others have greater needs than I do. Another hole he dug within me was in the Niños Ángeles, the handicapped children, to begin to realize how much needs the world is filled with. There's so many people who have so many needs. And then there was the orphans, perhaps as a third hole or a third corner. And that question, why am I not joyful enough? Why is everyone else in their poverty so happy? And then the fourth, perhaps even watching the nuns, I saw the need of joy is in the Lord's loving presence, not in having everything under control, not in having the bricks all there. That if I need happiness, I have to reveal that it's a hole that I need, something I can offer to the Lord that I have to let him fill. And so I had 4 emptinesses, 4 kind of pillars for the Lord to work on. And sometimes those emptinesses meant, like on Tuesday, my plan fell apart. We had an hour-long trip out to a place that our car couldn't even get to. We had to turn back. And yet, after that, we went back to the carnival, the place we built the wall before, and gave a lot of missionaries an unexpected closure. And that created more joy and pleasure. Sometimes we have to let the Lord tear our plans apart for Him to build it up. And then after that, the Lord begins to work. Once we present our needs and our holes before Him, He can do it. We also had the humiliation, many of us, myself included, of working and yet also seeing that the workers could do so much more than we could. What would take us about an hour to dig, they could do with much more precision in about 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And that would make us look small. And oftentimes in my heart, the work that I'm doing, I'm working hard. And once it's done, once I've done the best I can, the Lord just kind of steps in and finishes the work a lot faster. And I have to let Him do that and step back and let Him be the main builder in my heart. And after that, then the Lord begins to do the real work. We were connecting and tying up steel bars, rebars, bending things. And those rebars then became a foundation. The steel of prayers, the steel of service, the steel or the iron gifts of working on what the Lord has created is going to be the foundation of the house that I offer to Him. They hold everything together. It's tough to bend and to build, but it's important. And so all of our prayers and sacrifices are then left to the Lord, and then He places those into our holes, into our needs. And then He begins to build a house according to His will. And again, in those 4 holes, or in the 4 corners, that's where He began the construction. Perhaps my first pillar would have been that first Sunday, confessing for more than 2.5 hours. And seeing that, yes, we have our holes and our needs, or if you want, our miseries, but misery is matched by mercy. And God's mercy fills our holes and fills them with joy. He fills our needs in our hearts. And then the second corner, seeing the niños ángeles, seeing the orphans, all of our needs and all of our hearts, all we want is to be loved and to love. Our hearts are made for you and made for your charity and others. And then another fulfilling experience that many missionaries talked about, a third cornerstone, was seen in the orphans, that my heart and my love, especially when it's matched with Christ's, is wanted and is needed. I am needed, I am loved, and I can love. And again, if the fourth corner was the nuns, they also built us up by seeing that God's presence is not just something I need, but it's my joy. It's fulfilling. That God is the love and the only needed love of my heart. And so we left, and we haven't finished the kitchen. In the same way we left the mission, and the work in our hearts is not quite done. It's not over, it's a work in progress. But yet, things have been cleared, the tasks have been moved aside, space is cleared and burnt for the Lord, prepared. Needs have been dug out and presented to Him, despite the hardness of my heart of the soil. And the Lord begins His work. Next year we hope to come back and see how far the work advanced. And yet, we also know that in our hearts, it's going to be amazing to see how far the Lord has advanced and changed things in us. And so that incomplete nun's kitchen, which is a work in progress, symbolizes the incomplete or ongoing lifelong task of letting the Lord build up our hearts. And that's what I got out of the nun's kitchen. The mission isn't over, it goes on, and the Lord's work in our hearts goes on as well. A physical building and a temple, spiritual temple in our hearts is being built up. It began in Nicaragua, and it will keep on going until the Lord brings us to the fullness of joy in His house.